right, welcome to the second review of the evening. And up this time is DISTRAINT Deluxe Edition. Um, Ostensibly for the Nintendo Switch, but also the PC version as well, because we've been going back and forth before we started, and it turns out there's a significant difference between the two versions.
Yeah.
Mind you, we can't speak about the other consoles, the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One. So we are unsure if this is like an issue with like the port house that brought over to the consoles or what. But there is a major difference between platforms. Anyway, but before we get into that, Gallus, perhaps you should explain what DISTRAINT Deluxe Edition is.
Distraint is a legal term for the seizure of someone's property in order to obtain payment of money owed, especially rent. This is accurate for about 2/3 of the game, and I don't blame them for calling the game Distraint and also an eminent domain case in the middle. You play as a man named Price who works with a law firm of some sort that basically deals with property seizure for various purposes. You go to first an old woman's house and tell her that because she can't pay her rent, she has to move out. Then in the middle, you go into a cabin in the woods and tell an old man who's been living as a hermit that you're there to seize his property, basically because you're giving him money for it, but the state wants to build a highway through the area apparently. And then in the last case, you are seizing the property of a druggie who just doesn't bother to pay rent or any shit like that because he's a druggie. There is, of course, does absolutely no justice to this game because this game is a psychological horror game about how much it wears on a person to be constantly taking stuff away, basically taking people's the place that they live away from them. And so after the first case, you basically start, it starts before the first case, you start basically hallucinating severely about mostly that old lady, but also other stuff. There's a fucking zombie elephant. You see your dead parents a few times. And then at one point you can smell where a dog has gone because it got skunked. And then it's unclear when you see your bosses, because they've said that if you complete these three cases, you'll get to be a partner in the firm. And they're super creepy old mustache man clone things. This game has the thumbnail for the game has the characters in a fairly realistic art style, but in game it's a very toony and kind of Funko Poppy, and that kind of helps with the creepiness. I think sometimes.
I agree.
On one hand, I never actually was grossed out or shocked by anything in this game because it's abstract enough, so it kind of takes some of the horror out of it, but it also definitely adds to the unreality of it. And there's definitely a lot of stuff in this game where reality is not necessarily what you're experiencing.
Right. Because the central parable of this particular game is basically greed is eating away at the character, until
greed and guilt.
Yeah, greed and guilt. And I suppose this is a problem I had with the game, honestly, because honestly, it's a little too simplistic for its own good. Because the moods and emotions don't really match up with every scenario. You'll note that when it came into the debt collection, they picked the prototypical sweet old lady who's behind on her rent because she can't afford her meds. You know, which is a good example, but it's like why is he feeling guilt over the fucking druggie? That
I think he's still mostly feeling guilt over the first one, and the eminent domain case is really out of nowhere, and I think mostly is in the game for a change of scenery.
Could be. It's just like the other two cases didn't really line up morally with the first one.
Yeah, there's certainly less, and I mean, throughout the game, you never hallucinate the old man and his dog or the druggie. It's always you're hallucinating the old woman, and she's the one that's basically making you break down as you progress through your thing.
Right.
But the other stuff is clearly less of an issue.
But it's kind of also piled on to the anti-capitalist metaphor that the game is going for, because as noted, it's not just guilt, it's greed. He's also seeing all of this as advancing his own place in society, and that kind of really plays into the ending, and how honestly the ending was kind of counterintuitive on that end.
I kind of feel like I want to give some trigger warnings about the ending, but that would also be spoiler warnings, so I don't know what to do about that.
I'm like, well, we can throw up a spoiler section, so, Petty, if you will.
Yeah, so we're going to put up the spoiler thingy on the screen.
Yep, give me 1 second to find it.
Yeah, that's fine.
And it is really important to have this because, this is a big part of the story, and, it's like it's a big reason to play the game.
All right, so you guys ready?
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right, so we're in spoiler warning.
You might want to put that over the game window so it's clearly visible.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this shouldn't be too long.
Yeah. So anyway, spoilers for the ending. The guilt over what was her name?
Mrs. Godwin. Goodwin.
Mrs. Goodwin.
Yeah, the short form of it is, you have a change of heart, but then you get made partner, and then you change your mind about your change of heart, and then skip forward to a few years later after you've lost everything, and the trigger warning is for suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just the implication. They leave it.
It's not shown on screen, but you have to pick up the shotgun and shotgun, write the note, and sit down in the chair.
Your character pretty much blows his brains out. Like, they're not really fooling anyone. Like,
well, the thing is, they actually sort of. There's foreshadowing of this because that's what the corpse with its head split open that you've been seeing through the whole game is the result of that. It doesn't show it as the result of that, but that's a head that's had its shotgun go off in its mouth.
I mean, like I said, and this is actually a pretty good representation of what would happen in reality. Mm-hmm. Like, having, it really is, doing the good deed doesn't go unpunished, let's say.
Yeah.
And I mean, would stuff have happened better if he had a change of heart and, not kept doing it? Who knows?
It's just, if you're going along this in a, anti-capitalist mood, this isn't it. Because, it's a critique of capitalism, yes, but it's not a screed. Because, by rejecting the trappings of capitalism, he ended up in a worse position. Like, if anything, that's kind of a pro-capitalism bent.
Mm-hmm.
So, just this isn't really a political game. I mean, these are the politics of it, but it's also, this is more a tale of morality, like personal morality,
more
than anything else.
And I mean, you can kind of, you kind of have, well, we might as well clear the spoiler warning for this.
All right.
We're done with the spoilers.
All right, it has disappeared.
Okay, so yeah. Throughout the game, you kind of there's a mixed thing here because on one hand you're doing stuff that influences other people negatively, and the game definitely is not shy about showing it impact, like you're feeling bad about the fact that you're hurting other people. But on the other hand, it also gives you some sympathy for like the guy who like doesn't wants an apartment with water that works and a coffee maker that works and a roof that doesn't leak.
Yeah, yeah, that is another thing. It's like, these kind of jobs exist. It's like having sympathy for the tax collector. No one feels bad for them, but they still exist and they need to exist, kind of deal.
Yeah, and to some extent, this game. The only reason it avoids a "don't shoot the messenger" thing is because you are trying to become a partner in the firm. At which point you would be having a little bit more direction and discretion, because I mean your bosses are all assholes.
Yeah, that's kind of where they put an explicit profit motive, so they don't have to actually engage in nuance about the particular job itself.
But aside from that, it's psychological horror. There's a lot of fucked up stuff that goes on. Sometimes you have to participate in some of it, and it's never entirely clear because of the mental text exactly what parts of some things are real. Some of the stuff that happens in the asylum near the end is almost certainly not real, and probably also could have been dealt with under the trigger warning. But that was kind of gross. Excuse me, not asylum, nursing home.
Yeah, there.
But yeah, it felt like an asylum.
Did.
As far as gameplay, it's a fairly simple puzzle game. Like, there are puzzles, but they're all fairly linear, and you never have that many directions you can go in. Some of the apartments there are like doors that go into more other rooms that you might need to figure out. And when you're in the druggies apartment, you'll have to figure out how to get which way, because there are doors that are available to you normally, and there are doors that are only available to you when you're under the effect of the hallucinogenic stuff that's coming out of the jars that the guy left out on the fucking table. And vice versa, so yeah. Right. The puzzles were never super complicated. I used a guide to make it a little bit faster at parts, but I would have gotten most of it eventually. The only tricky parts are that there are a few things that are sometimes not obviously interactable, but the fact that you get a thing over your head when you are near an interactable thing usually helps. Yeah. You have an up to 3 item inventory. I don't think I ever actually filled that. No, I did once for a puzzle in the drug den. But yeah, it's fairly simple puzzles. It shouldn't be too taxing, and the point is more on the weird stuff that's going on and less on the mentally figuring out what to do with things.
Yeah, I suppose you could call this almost a walking simulator, because it's definitely in that territory, but there is a lot of actual light, but still puzzle gameplay.
The trickiest thing, the thing I got sort of stuck on for the longest, was trying to get the dog to leave the dead animal alone and come with you. And even then, I would have gotten to that eventually just by rubbing my face on everything that was interactable.
Yeah.
The only frustrating thing is that there are sometimes things that are not interactable until you've interacted with something else.
Event flags. Ask for them by name. Anyway, so I know we teased this at the opener, but we have mentioned that there is a great difference between the Nintendo Switch version and the PC version, and that name is Rumble. So,
evidently the PC version puts in all the jump scares and stuff running between you and the camera and stuff, in addition to having very distinctive sound cues for that, has Rumble for those things.
Yeah, Rumble is a very big part of this experience on PC. I played with an Xbox One controller. I definitely felt it. It's not just when the jump scares happen, like when the elephant comes up. You feel the elephant coming up, and
I still feel like that elephant was not adequately explained.
duly noted.
They kind of explain it. It's not adequate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, point is, Rumble is a big part of the psychological experience, as you would expect. This isn't anything new. Like, using
having for another form of force feedback to convey element or convey emotions to you is helpful.
Yes. And this is what we were getting at, because apparently the Nintendo Switch version does not have this Rumble feature.
Yeah, in spite of the Switch's allegedly superior Rumble technology, although I think my Joy-Cons might not be working perfectly, there's no option in the options menu for Rumble or anything. I checked on my hardware to make sure I didn't have Rumble turned off for this controller or for the system on a whole. And I never felt any rumble. And I have checked other games, and I've gotten at least some rumble with other games. So I don't know if it's the porting job or what, but I think they just left out the rumble feature, which is somewhat puzzling.
Indeed. And
what it does have for in options, though, it has about 10 playable languages.
That is impressive. And it should be mentioned that this was a porting job by Rata Lakia Games.
And a lot of their games don't have a ton of options, so...
Yeah, but it's sometimes they are the actual developer of the game, on all platforms. Sometimes they are just the mere porting house.
This game was developed, as you can see on this game was developed and published by Jesse McConan, who is presumably the game's creator.
He is, and I'm assuming that this console version was done because the sequel, DISTRAINT 2, is releasing next month. I'll know this is just the PC, but I can imagine that Rata Lakia would be working on the console version of this.
The Adventures of Mr. Price's successor, I suppose.
Very possibly. Don't know what this one's about, yet, because the game isn't out yet. Doesn't come out for a month. Also worth noting, this is another case where we have a price difference between versions. Not a big one, not as big as Warlock's Tower, but it's still there. DISTRAINT Deluxe Edition on the PC clocks in at $4.99. The Switch version is $5.99. That is $1 difference, but it's still a difference of $1. And I couldn't tell you why exactly that is. And ultimately, at least in my estimation, I would say go with the PC version.
Unless you really want the portability.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's because just that lack of, or you are like Naka and you hate Rumble.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it's the slightly cheaper price, but the thing that's really solidifying it is the fact that it's missing a feature.
Mm-hmm.
That's just really not a thing that should happen.
Yeah.
Especially since there doesn't seem to be an adequate reason for it to be missing. Now if it's pointed out where the Rumble feature is, we can amend. But until then,
that's an issue.
Yeah.
Follow up on previous comments. The languages this game apparently has are English, Italian, German, Spanish, French, Russian, Portuguese, Brazilian, Portuguese, Chinese, Polish, Turkish, and Korean.
That's a lot of languages.
Indeed.
really have no further comment on that. But,
yeah, no, I just thought since I mentioned it, I would, follow up on like what they are.
Yeah, as far as the game itself, I'd say it's a solid outing. Though, yeah, a lot of trigger warnings on this, not just because of like suicide and all that stuff, but this is an intense psychological experience.
Yeah, this is it's not a just zombie apocalypse horror or anything like that. This is the horror of bureaucracy that you are participating in.
No, this is the horror of man, and this is some deep shit. So, like I said, it's a solid experience. It's also really short. So, and as far as the overall price point, $5 is perfectly serviceable here. And keep in mind,
the Switch price is not like unfair for the game. It's just it's an inferior version. So if you want to get the force feedback,
right. Anyway, so yeah, I think that'll about do it for Distraint here. Also, to answer the question of what is the Deluxe edition, well, here's the thing. This is like the remake of this game. This game was actually developed in a much, I think, simpler format a few years before, and then it got remade in 2015. Worth noting, the PC version also has both versions, the Deluxe edition and the regular version, the first version.
I'm pretty sure Switch version doesn't have that either. Again, not a ton of options.
Well, there you go. Like I said, in this case, do pick up the PC version because that has the most options, and it's slightly cheaper. So, anyway.
And I mean, there's a bundle where you can get both of them for like this and pre-order the sequel for a reduced price on Steam. So,
yeah. So anyway, that'll about do it for Distraint Deluxe Edition. Be sure to tune in for the last review of the evening, as Petty Fan will be reviewing The Sojourn.